All right, guys, I'm back for a quick follow-up video. Now that the official specs have come out from Ram on the 2500, 3500s for 2025, we have some concrete data. And if I ever provide incorrect information, I'm going to do what I can to either edit the video to put the correct information in, or like in this case, I'll just come out with a follow-up video and explain what was wrong and what we found out to be right. So in this case, the gear ratios with the new ZF8 were incorrect that were floating around, that were rumored. So I'm going to go over that in depth and give you guys all the correct information that I found. It really irritates me how lazy some of the media guys are getting. It seems like everything's just all about clickbait now. Everybody just wants those views. So like TFL Trucks YouTube channel, he's like one of the first guys in Detroit that gets to look at these trucks, and he's spewing out incorrect information 14 minutes and 45 seconds into his video. He's sitting there saying that first gear is a 489 ratio when in fact it's 471. I don't know how you can make that mistake when you're at that level. You've got the spotlight on you. I'm really shocked that like the Dodge engineers on site didn't correct him on that one. Also, here we go, Car and Driver magazine. So they're talking about the Cummins jumps 30 horsepower up to 430, which if you can do basic math would say that the last high output Cummins was only making 400 horsepower. That's just totally incorrect. The last generation was 420. So there's a huge typo, right? It's not even a typo. They're not even proofreading or fact checking. And then they also say this is getting a max tow rating of 36,610. If we go to the Stellantis document, we can see right here max tow rating is 36,580. So it's just one of those things, kind of drives me nuts that we're just being fed incorrect information. So where did I screw up? Well, I think I figured this screen recorder out. I can only record over one app on my computer at a time. So I've put everything into this web browser. So hopefully things work like they're supposed to this time. So here on this left side, this left column here, these were the rumored ratios. Here are the actual ratios, and there's actually multiple ratios. The only ones I have concrete proof on are for the Cummins 25-3500s, which is this row here. Supposedly you're going to use a different ratio spread for the Hemis, and then the cab and chassis 3500 through 5500. They're calling that their wide ratio spread. They have what they call close and wide ratio spreads. These are speculative. These popped up on a forum, so I have no proof. These, however, I've seen them listed on Ram websites. So if you go to a dealer website that has real specific specs on the trucks, these are actually listed out. So the difference between the rumored and the actual is 0.64 versus 0.67, and that's a substantial difference. So if we look at the spreads on the actual, on this row versus this row, our ratios on our splits are actually a little bit lower starting out, and that's a good thing. And then when we have to jump back up to get into fourth gear, that difference between the jump into the next gear, that's only a 3-point difference versus what we thought was going to be a 7-point difference. So that's good. That's optimistic. Then we stay at 29, drop to 19, and then instead of having a 12-point jump, we only have a 6-point jump. So I'm a lot more optimistic about how this is going to perform now. If you want to pause, you can screenshot this or whatever and look at all these spreads. They differ a little bit for the Hemi and the cab and chassis, and I think they're actually worse spreads. I think the the standard Cummins spreads are probably going to be the best. So another funny thing, this is a ZF8 transmission, and the code is actually ZF8AP1075, and the 1075 is obviously the torque rating. So then there's rumored for the Hemi, they're going to call it the 8AP430, and then the cabin chassis is going to get the 8AP850. So this is all via a post from a guy, username Brutal, on Cummins forum. I haven't seen those listed on any Stellantis or Ram websites, so that's speculation at this point. But the funny thing is, I've heard this transmission called the Power Line. I've seen them use the Torque Flight name, which is ridiculous because this isn't even made by the same people. And then I would rather just use its actual model name, which is the ZF8AP1075. I believe the rumored ratios probably came from the existing transmission that's been being used in Europe this whole time. I think Ram wanted to find a transmission that they could just dive head first in with. You know, I'm surprised they didn't leave a second automatic option out there in case this proves to be a massive failure. But I actually found a YouTube video all the way back from June of 2018 where they already had this transmission installed in a Cummins truck. So they've been field testing this for at least 6.5 years. So I think these ratios were probably off a European spec truck. That's probably where we got those from. So now we're going to dive back into looking at ratios and ring and pinion ratios. So if you're freaking out about the 342s, there's two different ways we can look at this. On the left side here, I have the 342 stock tire size, ZF8 ratio. On the right side, I have the Aisin with the 373s. So as you can see, 68, 75, 80 miles an hour, we're basically the same. The ZF8 with the 342 in overdrive is going to behave just about the same, actually a little bit lower RPM than a 373 with the Aisin. Now the cool thing is if you look at it in terms of first gear, the ZF8 with a 342 has more gear reduction than the Aisin with a 410. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds here. Now my theory is the reason the 373 and the 410s aren't available as an option with the Cummins is because they must be maxing out something's capacity, whether it's the strength of the frame, suspension, brakes. I don't know what it is. But if their tow rating numbers actually drop just a hair from last year's high output model with the 410s, that tells me they must be at their limit. So they probably aren't going to be able to bump it until they go to the next generation truck here in a couple more years. That's the only thing logically I can think of, unless perhaps they just want to force the 342 ratio on people so that they can see what the mileage difference is, because I'm sure a lot of people that are skeptical would probably opt for a lower gear. And speaking of lower gears, we'll go over to this gear calculator. So it's the ZF8 on both. I've got the 342s with the stock tires on the left, and then on the right I've got my 35s with 373s, because if you do the math, it says to keep your gear ratio the same with a bigger tire, I'd need 372s. Obviously 373 is the closest thing. So coming down here looking at 68, 75, 80 miles an hour in second overdrive, we're pretty much same. So that tells me 373 with the model year 2025 should be your ideal ratio for a 35-inch tire. I think 410s, it's going to give you better pulling power, but it's really going to raise your RPMs quite a bit. So here's, roughly 150 RPM difference, almost 190 RPM. And I don't think it's going to be worth, unless you're towing extremely heavy, having that super deep 410. So the odd thing to me is the Hemi still comes with 373 and 410 option. I'm not sure if that's an 11.5-inch axle. And then you go to the 12-inch axle. That's supposedly standard now with the Cummins. I don't know if that ratio exists. I don't know if that's the same axle that's going in the cabin chassis. Here is the spec sheet I've been able to find. It seems like this was just uploaded. It just popped up for me today. So we finally get the official. I mean, this wasn't on the Ram website or even Cummins website. We get the RPMs for the rated power specs. So 430 horse at 2,800 RPM, 1075 foot-pounds of torque at 1,800 RPM. So I'm a little surprised they've tuned this to produce torque at that high of RPM, because essentially below 1,800 RPM you're going to be lugging the engine. And all my experience, a diesel engine gets its best fuel economy or brake specific fuel consumption at approximately 10% higher RPM than the maximum torque RPM. So for 1,800 RPM times 1.1, that's 1,980 RPM, or approximately 2,000 RPM. So I would expect, without seeing a BSFC map for this engine, I would expect this to get the best mileage at 2,000 RPM. And if we look at, going 80 miles an hour with stock gearing, that's going to be pretty close. If we bump it up, essentially the next ring and pinion ratio higher, you're going to be closer at 75 miles an hour. And then if you drop down, that's the fun thing with this calculator. I can just type in the RPM and it'll tell me my speed. So it's stock gearing, stock tire size, 65 miles an hour. That's probably where quite a bit of cruising's done. And then 82, which that seems pretty high to me. If we went to a numerically higher but lower gear, it would be 59 in 7th gear and 74. So I'm not sure which one's better, but those are just some numbers, some food for thought for you guys. So the other way to look at it is, now instead of only getting partial power in some gears because of the transmission requiring some engine detuning, they say we're going to get 100% power out of the engine available in all 8 gears. So the way they said it in their video, this was a video from Ram, he said, now there's the opportunity for 100% power output in all 8 gears, which is a 70% increase over the 6-speed predecessor. Okay, so doing the math, that equates to just about 59%. 70% more than 59% is 100%. So that means the Aisin, and I don't know what gears, if it's like 1st through 3rd or 5th and 6th, or they didn't specify. But in some gears in the Aisin, the engine would detune to 59% power. Whereas in the 2025, you'll get full 100% power output in all 8 gears. Now that's substantial. So with the 342s, although they might seem too high, now that can be offset because you have more power. I mean, it's really the same thing as looking at like a semi. They're running 43-inch tires with 410s, but they have massive amounts of torque. So I think the reason we're seeing, and I said this in the first video, the front end redesign is to allow more airflow through the cooling stack. So you got to get rid of all that plastic that's blocking airflow, because now instead of only putting out 59% of the advertised power, it's actually going to be utilizing 100% of it in all 8 gears. That's not to say, like, don't misquote me, that's not to say you're spitting out 430 horsepower all the time while you're driving. Like, obviously that's only under full load and full acceleration, wide open throttle. You're not going to see that at 5 miles an hour in 1st gear, taking off out of the grocery store parking lot. You know what I mean? But that's the second way to look at it, is now we have full power on tap. And if you're shopping, GM and Ford, they both detune there. So the 500 horse, 1,200 foot-pound of torque Power Stroke, I've talked to lots of people who say they really don't notice that much difference between a high output Cummins with 125 less foot-pounds of torque because the Power Stroke's still being detuned to save that transmission because it can't actually handle that much power in all 10 gears. Lastly, I want to talk about just some options on the truck. This doesn't have anything to do with the transmission. I've been playing with the truck builder and the options, and first thing I want to point out is if you delete the bed off a 25 or 3500, that deletes the bed, the taillights, the tailgate, and the bumper, and all the sensors in the bumper and the camera and the tailgate. They only give you a $400 credit. I'm pretty sure a taillight costs like $500. So that is kind of mind-blowing that they screw you in that way, that they don't give you several $1,000s off so you can put that towards your custom flatbed if that's the route you're going to go. If you go to a cabin chassis 3500, then you're going to get the detuned engine that's only like 360 horse. So nobody's going to want that. You're better off, sadly, taking the bed off and trying to resell it. Now, I was looking at passive entry. And if we look at this, this tells us it's an option for Rebel Power Wagon, which are only 2500 models. It's standard on Laramie and up, and it's not even an option on Tradesman or Bighorn. That blows my mind. So what I don't understand is this is a Charger Pursuit model, which is like plain Jane. There's no cameras, there's no remote start, it's a no frills base model with a couple things that are special for the police. It still has passive entry and locking. How in the world would you not have this standard on a 25 Ram? We're talking $60,000+ for any of the trucks, and you can only get it on basically a Laramie or higher 3500. You can't get it on the Tradesman or the Bighorn, and the Bighorn is their biggest seller. That's their biggest volume seller that I've been told. So it's not an option. I'm hoping I can retrofit it. There's retrofit kits for the older models, but just stupid. Why is that not standard? I love this handle. It just blows me away that that's not standard by now, and it's not even an option. The last thing I want to check out is the steering wheel, and I'll show you this layout, and then I'll show you the layout in my Charger. But basically, the Charger came out with that body style in 2015 that had this steering wheel setup on it. I haven't looked back if it goes even further back than that. It might go all the way back to like 2010. But this is actually at least 10-year-old regurgitated stuff. I mean, it's kind of disgusting that they can't come out with something newer or better. Maybe they found out this works the best, so they're going back to it. But I really dislike the location of your gear limiting selector switches right down here. So looking at this steering wheel that's 10 years old, this layout basically the same. Instead of having plastic hard individual buttons, now it's like a rubberized coating. But I mean, it's the same thing for that. This is special to the Pursuit Charger. And then your gauge cluster buttons are the same. And then they put the gear, I call it manual mode. They call it like gear limiter, but they put those buttons there. So if you're driving, you're either going to have a soft grip and a long thumb to be able to hit those, or you're going to have to basically take your right hand off the steering wheel, which is dangerous. So if I'm driving and I have to aggressively downshift all of a sudden, I want to be able to have both hands on the wheel. So this has buttons on the back side. This is your radio volume, and this is like your skip forward or back. And then there's a middle button that does something with secure park. And it does that on both sides. I don't know why they don't move your manual gear shift buttons to the back side like the radio buttons. That would probably be the most ideal setup I could think of. On this Pursuit, it's got them like on the Duramax, like LBZ Duramax. It's got them there. Turn the manual mode on and off here, and then you set your top speed gear limit. This is a 2016 Charger. This body style came out in 2015, so that means these buttons Like the layout on the new 25s, they're regurgitating 10 plus year old technology. It's just wild. And while I'm here, I'll also point out having your tow haul mode all the way down here, you have to reach across and down and probably take your eyes off the road to hit. Why is that not on the end of your gear selector like any other vehicle? Like a LBZ Duramax tow haul button was right here, and then you have your exhaust brake button down here. That could be on the column shifter as well. It really doesn't make any sense to me to stick that in a place to force you to take your eyes off the road if safety is really their number one concern. So thanks for tuning in. I hope I cleared up anything that was kind of murky or unclear in my first video. I'm glad I was able to figure out this screen recorder so I could show you my spreadsheet this time. Again, I plan on test driving a bunch of this stuff, so I'll let you guys know how the numbers compare to real world testing. And with that, we'll catch you next time.